he goes to his agent and his manager and he says, well, we're not getting paid for this. They were in the process of renegotiating their deal with Universal, and it's equivalent of what video on demand is, or what directed, movie or DVDs are today that get negotiated in someone's
The
contract.
streaming, yeah.
Streaming. My grandfather got points on the back end before anybody else. Once again, all of these people paved the way for where we are today. What I teach still to this day, and not to brag or whatever, but my business now, I mean,
Marki Costello, hosting teacher, casting director. There's a lot of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, you could give me your background, Marki, because you come from the business. You know what I mean? Both within casting, the granddaughter of Lou Costello, of Abbott and Costello. Was showbiz something you were always going to jump into, or did you kind of like say, I salivate to kind of do really well in the business? Or was there a time that you said, I don't even care about this stuff? Like, where were you at with it?
well, a lot of people have to understand, my mother was Lou Costello's middle child. And, my mom died when I was 19. So I was very young. And my mom worked in unscripted for years. There was a big company that did all of like the game shows back in the day called Mark Goodson, Bill Todman, Goodson Todman Productions. And she worked for them for years. And so I would be sitting in rehearsal halls with contestants for years when I was younger, when I would go visit her, or I needed the car or whatnot. So when she died so suddenly of a brain aneurysm, I had to start working literally a week later. And Chuck Barris was a friend of my mother's, and he said, come and meet with me. And so I went to the Sunset Gower Studios. I met with Chuck Barris, and he said, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know. I mean, my mom died. I'm dropping out of college basically to start working. And he gave me a job. We worked a season of Dating Game, one day off, a season of Newlywed Game, one day off, and a season of Gong Show. And it was that was my entrance, my intro into the world of unscripted and hosting. And then, 20 years later, building the first, unscripted casting company. We cast The Bachelor, Temptation Island, before unscripted was where it is now. And managing hosts before anybody like when I opened up my management company, big agents were like, you'll never survive just having hosts. Not only did I survive, but thrived and became the go-to. And then I would teach people how to be great hosts, how to be great in the unscripted world, how to be great just being you, right? And so I had my own TV show called The Drama Queen. I mean, I did lots of TV because so many times producers would say, Marki, you just do it. I'd be casting and I'd show someone how to do it, and a producer would say, you're just going to host it. I hosted a lot of stuff and did a lot of stuff. I just never pursued it because for me, I liked making money. I liked the security of making money. And, going from show to show or struggling, I wasn't into, but I could always do it all. I think that's what made me a great teacher as well. If I said to someone, stand up and read the prompter and do this, and if they looked at me and go, okay, I don't know how you do it, I could get up and do it. So, it's crazy where we are in reality now. I love it. Like my son, Lucas, my oldest son, who would have ever thought he's casting reality TV now? I would have never thunk it. But I guess it's just something you're sort of, you invest into, and you either swim.
I got two questions about credibility, I guess, like credibility or appreciation. Do you think enough people, like as we are now, all these years removed from, like, respect what your grandfather did with the Abbott and Costello comedy duo? That's one part of the question. And you personally, in your business, do you think you get the respect? Because this is what I'm going to tell you. You were the very first person, because again, I have not only taken classes with you, and then I later worked in your office. So when I say I know Marki, I know how she moves, right? And I'm wondering if you feel that you have not got the respect of what you had done as far as creating talent to be hosts and go further in that world by identifying what their brand is. You were the very first person about 8 years, maybe even 9 years before every single person who was pursuing a thing, a cook, the legal eagle, whatever it was, that you have to have your brand. So I'm just wondering, credibility wise, do you feel like you haven't got your flowers? Do you feel like as time has went on, people don't respect the Abbott and Costello duo of what they brought to the table? Where do you feel with some of those kinds of things?
It's interesting because I did a podcast yesterday and we talked about legacy, and we had this amazing conversation about everybody paves the way for the next person. And I think what's kind of lost on this young generation is not realizing everybody else who paved the way. It's interesting because I've put over 22,000 brands and people on platforms. I mean, I have people that come up to me that say, I hated your class because you would always tell us brand, brand, brand. And I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
what my brand was, but I got it 2 years later. And now
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
sitting here and making X amount of dollars. I think my gift and curse is I sort of see things trending before they happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to say to someone like, look, I remember giving this girl this great brand of, hey, social media is colliding, and doing like
Mm-hmm.
a countdown. And then, of course, 2 years later, everybody was doing that creative. Or be a foodie. And,
Mm-hmm.
now so many people are foodies. And then even the where we've evolved with social media, I go to these businesses and I say to them, like, okay, perfect example. That sandwich shop that had the pickle, what's it called? That sandwich that everybody was eating, this pickle sandwich. And I go to get one, and the guy's like, yeah, we're out of pickles. I'm like, what do you mean you're out of pickles? You're doing this for 2 weeks, and how are you out of pickles? And the guy was like, well, our manager thought we'd only sell like 3 a day. And I
Mm-hmm.
go, well, your manager's a moron, because they're not factoring these businesses, the
Mm-hmm.
power of Instagram, and especially TikTok. People literally eat in their cars, and they're
Yeah.
eating pickle witches. And if someone's scrolling, I'm like, ooh, that's good. And the way the algorithm works is if you watch a video for more than 20 seconds on a pickle gosh darn sandwich, they're going to
Mm-hmm.
keep putting them in your For You page, right? Like,
Right.
so I tell people now that are like, I want to be a host, I want to have a TV show. I'm like, no, what you want to do is build your social platform, build your brand, and really pump out great content on social media, cross promote, get people to be guests on yours based on your creative and your brand with another person's creative and brand. And it will just skyrocket.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, in theory, right there, your credibility has been really strong. I mean, I remember early on, I think I got footage actually of this. Mariana Hewitt does such a wonderful job, but she was in your class. I had done green screen with her years ago. This was
Right,
so early on. And so,
right.
Marky, though you are looked at as tough, and your name was the drama queen
Right.
on the TV show. And by the way, later in this episode, I'm gonna tell you where you messed up on the drama queen. I'm gonna tell you,
Okay.
because I got to school you back, right? But it is the truth. It's like that's the thing. And I think it's like with anything that you do, if you are willing to listen and sort of workshop these ideas that come into your universe, you have an opportunity to like swing the bat and really connect and hit that home run. But a lot of people I do know, they would listen to you, but they would also have a heavy opinion. And I think it really sucked as time went by. Once everyone went direct to connect, type of social media or whatever, suddenly they didn't want to necessarily listen like they used to. So I just think that the principles that you taught way back in the day, they still stick around. And when you do a digital thing, a social media thing, you can cut corners, but the essence of a brand is always going to be specific, and it's worthy, and that's why I refer to your grandfather, Lou Costello. Like that doesn't go away. That doesn't go away just because we're in a different era. Can you talk to me real quick about his era of comedy versus the era that is a little bit more faster consumption and maybe not even good consumption? It's not even good content sometimes, but that will still make you a success these days. In your grandfather's era, Lou Costello of Abbott and Costello, you actually had to be the best at your craft. Am I right?
Well, yeah, back in that time in the 40s, you know what I mean? In the 30s, 40s, and 50s, great teams. You had Laurel and Hardy, you had Abbott and Costello, you had Jerry and Dean, you know what I mean? You had this, the Smucker brothers or Smother brothers, you know what I mean? You had great duos because that was the branding of the day. You were in vaudeville and you had a straight man and you had a funny man. And you were, if you were smart, you were able to parlay that into like my grandfather did. You know, what a lot of people don't realize is Universal Studios, which today is the biggest entertainment conglomerate,
Mhm.
NBC Universal,
Mhm.
they were about to go bankrupt, Universal, and they signed Abbott and Costello, and they took them out of bankruptcy. And, you know, Abbott and Costello was such a massive, you know, a massive duo for them. They did 8 of their, you know, X amount of movies. And then my grandfather was always the funny man, but he was also very smart. So he one time was walking on Hollywood Boulevard, and he saw these little, like, you know, films that they were releasing of their movies, like where you could,
Mhm.
like, the 9mm films like you would get at like the novelty shops on Hollywood Boulevard. He goes to his agent and his manager, and he says, well, we're not getting paid for this. They were in the process of renegotiating their deal with Universal, and it's equivalent of what video on demand is, or what directed, you know, movie or DVDs are today that get negotiated in
Mhm.
someone's
The
contract.
streaming, yeah.
Streaming. My grandfather got points on the back end before anybody else. Once again, all of these people paved the way for where we are today.
Mhm.
What I teach still to this day, and not to brag or whatever, but my business now, I mean, my office burned down right after COVID. ADT, the alarm company, put a new alarm pad on. I
Mhm.
was then flying 2 days later to Atlanta to coach Kanye West chef for this big new Food Network show. And I get a call that there's a fire in my studio, which you've been in my studio a million times,
Mhm.
my
Mhm.
beautiful studio of 20 plus years. And I'm, you know, 200, you know, 2,600 miles away. And, you know, I came back, and my studio was just basically had a wire fire behind the alarm pad that
Mm.
ADT that you paid to secure your business or home burned my business down. But my point to all of that is, you know, where I am today, because I think you always have to be evolving.
Mhm.
Now, today, listen, when a big name wants hosting or media training, I'm on CAA, ICM, WMEs, I'm on all of their lists.
Mhm.
And, you know, what I still teach to this day, which I think is invaluable and works on any medium, whether it's TV, film, social media, podcasts, is know your audience based on your brand. Who is your audience that you're going to be engaging,
Mhm.
entertaining, enlightening, educating, right?
Right.
Now, what's interesting is we came out of the strikes. We had the
Mhm.
actor strike and the writer strike. And and a lot of big name actors started to do unscripted, because that was one thing you could still do without crossing the picket line, because unscripted is a completely different genre than SAG. It's after
Yeah.
and it's unscripted.
You had like a Terry Bradshaw did one. You even had
Oh my God, dude, Anthony
a
Anderson, you
lot of
have
people. Yeah.
Keke Palmer, you have Niecy Nash, you have Rob Lowe, you have all of
Yeah.
these huge names hosting, and they realized, wait a minute, I can still do my scripted show about the fire
Mhm.
department in Austin. I can
Yeah.
host the floor. You know what I mean? I can go and do a movie. And so what's happened in the host world, and even in the unscripted world, you can go do Love Island and come, and you go into the island having 200 followers, and you come out having 2 million, if you know how to maneuver yourself right on
Mhm.
camera. And so then you come out and you have 2 million followers, and then you do on call her daddy podcast, and then you're on this, and then you're off to the races if you're
Mhm.
smart. So I think in this day and age, it's all the guardrails are up, meaning there's no more bound. There's no, you can go in every lane now. There's
Mhm.
no, you know, before it was like, I'm an actor, I don't want to host. You know, I'm a host, no one wants me to act. And now you can do it all.
I want to talk about the complexities of um that works well for the people who are already up. What about your people who are still breaking in? What is your bit of advice for that? I mean, I look at myself as I do a really great job. I've been in radio for about 20 years. The resume speaks for itself, but it is sometimes challenging. And this is not an excuse thing. And I love to always bring you blunt, real stuff, because you could always give it to me nice and raw back. But what does that feel like when you have somebody who has the skill set to do it, but sometimes you are now competing with somebody like Rob Lowe, who I love on the TV show,
Right.
911 Lone Star. He's fantastic. What a great career. But I don't want to feel like I'm competing, but sometimes you worry that, you know, where do those dollars go for people that have really like laid into the work? Like, what is your thought process on that? Do you think it's a complaint? Like, do you think I'm being a little sensitive? What do you feel about that?
I feel that you have to, media is a current, it moves, right?
Hmm.
And if you don't move with where it's going, then you're going to get left behind. You're going to drown. You're not going to, thrive. And it's interesting. I was coaching a girl the other day. She's got a nice following on social media. She's got some brand deals. She has a podcast. She has a deal with this other company to do stuff on their digital platform. But she's like, I just can't, get past the finish line. And I said, I looked at all of your stuff and I explained to her why. I said, because you are still holding yourself back. There is something that you're not doing, like meaning you get there, but then you pull back. You're almost too afraid of offending anybody. And here's where we are. Listen when I tell this to all of your listeners. You've got to push the envelope and you have to be unapologetically yourself. The minute you're holding yourself back to be like, oh, I don't want to offend them, or I don't want to say this, or those days are over. You've got to be for what you stand for. And you've got to you can't be afraid to push that envelope. It's evolving.
You're right, and you got to adapt. You do have to adapt, which is going to bring me to my next person I want to talk about, because I know you and myself, and like lots of people love what she has done. That's Joan Rivers. We'll talk about her in a second.
But
you are right. I gotta say,
Hey, Ronnie Jr.